Continuing the conversation on the BBI report and what's contained in the BBI, some are proposed constitutional amendments, some are proposed just policy issues, and others would require some bills or acts of parliament to be enacted. Let's bring in constitutional expert lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo, who joins us now on the line. Kamotho, good morning.
Good morning, Eric, and the team. How are you?
We're very well, thank you. Asante sana for speaking to us. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you.
I do not need to ask you that question, but I just will ask you. I'm sure you've read this report.
Yeah.
So before we go into
I have, Eric.
before we go into our own
Yeah.
questions about it, just give us your own reading of this. What do you make of the BBI report?
Let me say this, Eric. What I concentrated on was reading the proposed amendments to the Constitution as opposed to the entire report, which has a lot of policy proposals and legislative proposals. Policy proposals, you don't even need the BBI report. A lot of those you will find in other documents within government, maybe adjusted here and there. The legislative proposals are still subject to a parliamentary process, so I wanted to concentrate more on the proposed constitutional amendments because those are the ones that are going to define the success or otherwise of the BBI.
Mm-hmm.
I think let me say that the report has three components to it. One is the changes that have been extracted, that have been prepared to resolve political issues. You know, the questions about the structure of the executive and the additions of the membership at the top to 5. The question of the structure of parliament by including cabinet secretaries within parliament. Now, those were resolving particular political questions. Then you'll find a lot of other proposals that actually are trying to respond to concerns about the Constitution as it is, and in terms of its effectiveness. And you'll find those in the area of devolution, like the role of the CRA, the issue of what you do about audited accounts, the issue of money, the fact that you're increasing the monies available to the county government, and etc. And then there's a third set, which one is not sure what it is responding to, you know, but it's there all the same. An example is the proposal to have the IEBC be comprised primarily of representatives of political parties. You know, does the IEBC then still remain an independent commission?
Yep.
The removal of the National Police Service Commission. So there are some of those things that one is not absolutely sure what they are responding to. But I would say that broadly those are the three groups. On the whole, my assessment is that I think I am positively surprised by it. I think when a document like this is being crafted in the context of a fairly strong political leadership. Don't forget that the previous constitution was a very multi-stakeholder driven process. This was largely driven by politics. One was worried that it would have quite a significant fall, peeling back some of the gains of the constitution. But there's not much of that. There may be one or two concerns, but there's not much in terms of clawback, because that is what one would fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so my overall is that it's a good report. It probably will need some rethinking in some areas, but on the whole, I think I'd give it a fairly good pass.
They're looking at some parts, Kamotho, now. Like you said, those things that don't require any kind of constitutional amendment to get them going, things that maybe should have been happening anyway, regardless of a report like this coming out. Things in certain areas where people essentially should have been doing their job and getting those things running. Can those things start now? And should there be any kind of clawback, pushback to those particular issues?
In fact, I would imagine that is where those who want to push government to move on, because these are now proposals which government has endorsed in a sense.
Yep.
One should start with the low-lying fruit and say, look, there are certain things that government can do today and it's possible to isolate those. And I think there's an implementation matrix of some sort, which should actually isolate the policy proposals. Some of the policy proposals are very good, but they're not new. I mean, it's stuff that we've had before in various speeches on Jamhuri Day and other national celebration days. So those actually can be done now. The legislative proposals, there's no reason why Parliament can't start working on those bills. And so those ones, actually, people should now isolate them and have a very clear implementation matrix. And then be saying to government, look, this is your document. Can you start now working on it? So that then we leave out the constitutional proposals, which require a lot more work and in terms of processes, and which may even require a referendum at some point. And even that is an issue that is contested as to whether the proposals that have been made actually will require us to go to a referendum. But I would agree with you that we need to move on the policy ones, the low-hanging fruits as quickly as possible.
On the political side, is it a bit surprising that despite all the talk for the creation of a third tier of government, it does not feature?
I'm not surprised because I think one of the things that this document has done is to make it palatable to most people who would oppose it. There are certain constituencies that you want to fear, that you want to be careful about when you make proposals of this nature. If you had created a third tier of government, then it would mean you would have had to decide what to do about counties. If you made a proposal to either dissolve counties or group them together, you'd have had a nationwide rebellion against the document. So I think that was saved because it would have too many. And remember that the people who were pushing this were largely the retiring governors, because I'm not even sure that the rationale for it was very well thought through. Because there is nothing that you can't do through law by requiring that the current counties as well form regional blocks and give them a statutory foundation. You don't actually require the constitution. But if you define the constitution in terms of a third tier and therefore interfered with the 47 county setup, that was going to give you problems. But if you look at the proposals, they actually have something for everybody. The governors will support the draft because it increases money. And importantly, previously it used to say that it's going to be 15% of the audited revenue of the audited accounts approved by Parliament. Now, what Parliament was doing is delaying approval, so would still be basing our 15% on the accounts of 4 years ago. This amendment says, look, if Parliament has not approved, the 35% will be based on the audit report most recently presented by the Auditor General. So even if Parliament has not approved it, it's going to be a basis. That will be very palatable for most governors and people who are supportive of devolution. The Ward Development Fund guarantees you that most MCAs will support because they've been fighting about that fund for so long. Now it's a constitutional requirement for a certain proportion of the money to go to the ward.
What is the justification for that?
That's a question. Okay, right. So there are many things that are palatable to critical constituencies.
But what is the justification apart from just looking at trying to bring on board as many political players to support this as possible? What would be the justification, for example, for creating the Ward Development Fund?
Because it's a good thing. Don't forget that when we started our constitutional reform process, the main complaint was about exclusion at a national level, where there are certain regions which did not have money, because politically they had no investment value, either because they had little votes or, they are minorities, in particular areas politically, they were not useful. That has now gone down to the counties, so that in some counties, if the governor comes from Region A and the deputy governor, those are the areas that get the benefit of county resources. So what you're doing now is requiring that even within the county itself, it doesn't matter whether or not you support, county funds are going, at least a certain proportion must go to the specific wards. And it's a small proportion, by the way, but it requires that every ward must feel the effect of county revenue. So and by the way, practically, it is in any event happening. Most counties have some sort of ward development fund or the other. This says it does not depend on the goodwill of the governor or the threat of impeachment or the threat of being censored, but the constitutionally this is required. So yes, it is a good thing, and particularly if I think the assumption by most people is that means the MCAs will now have a fund. No, the fund will still be run by the executive, but it ensures that every little ward in this country gets a benefit of county resources. That, I think, for me is a positive thing. But it also comes with the added advantage that, like I said, you'll get 23 counties if they decide to go that route, because it's not clear which route they intend to go.
Kamotho, in your opening statements, you said, if I heard you right, that you are pleasantly surprised. I may be paraphrasing here.
Yes.
Why were you pleasantly surprised?
Pleasantly surprised because, having worked with the 2010 Constitution, I know that it's a fairly progressive constitution, both in terms of the Bill of Rights and the protections. And I don't think Kenyans have internalized and utilized a lot of those rights. In terms of the expanded democratic space, in terms of the expanded areas of accountability and transparency. And my fear was that because it's a politically driven process, and the truth of the matter is the politicians have never been friends of transparency, increased democratic space, my fear was that there was going to be clawback. And because you can sneak in all manner of things that claw back on people's rights, without them actually understanding, because of the loud nature of the politics, that people are going to sneak in some of those clawback provisions. So my surprise was that there's actually one can count one or two things that one would say, what's that about? I mentioned the IBC question. I noticed, if I'm not wrong, that you can't remove the DPP. That's my reading of it. There are no removal provisions for the DPP. I don't know why. There are provisions about the non-requirement of approval of cabinet secretaries and principal secretaries by parliament. I'm not sure why that was removed. But on the whole, a lot of the proposals that are there, one would generally agree with them because they do resolve some issues that we've had with the Constitution. But like I said, there are some others that I think one would have to look for justification, but maybe there's good reason. And those who are pushing the document will be able to tell us why it is they've removed the Police Service Commission and instead set up a sort of body of the various leaders of security organs. Maybe there's justification
for that. Looking at another issue, and it's likely to come in and be one of contention, but the removal of the nominated offices, nominated members of parliament, nominated. So the whole nomination process for certain offices now has been removed, or that has been the suggestion. One might say, Kamotho, that these nominated positions then allowed these individuals to go into counties and then push for certain policies or things, and then do that bereft of these political alignments or personal interests, that they could do that by nature of the fact that they were nominated. Now, removing them would mean that you don't have anybody who would essentially fight for the people. That is one side that has come out. What do you think about the removal of these nominated positions across board?
Okay, now what the draft has done is that it has adjusted our electoral system, fairly significantly. In one respect, in the Senate, and I think it's good to see this in terms of each house and what it does. In the Senate, there are no nominations, absolutely. You will have 94 members of the Senate, two elected from each county, a man and a woman. That essentially means that everybody who's there is elected, but you have resolved the gender issue in the Senate. When you go to the National Assembly, it's an MMP system, it's a mixed member proportionate system. You retain the 290 constituencies, but my reading is you have 360 members. So that means that 70 members are going to be voted in through a proportional system. That proportional system is still a nomination system because it's going to come from party list. Each party will present its list, and it's going to be a sort of zebra list, so where you have a man and a woman, you have persons with disability, you have youth, and then that is the list from which, depending on the vote that the general election you obtain during the general election, that is what is going to determine the number of members in that 70 proportionate process that you are going to get. So in a sense, you still have nominated members in the National Assembly. What has been removed is the women representative seat. So that now what you have are people actually who come in through party list. Now, some people will argue, would you rather have a party list, or would you rather have people have been elected, because then at least they come with a democratic mandate. But I think the idea is to move us towards the proposals in Bomas, which had really proposed very strongly to have a proportionate representative system, sort of like the South African model, where it is parties that push their policies and it's parties then that submit their members, as opposed to the sort of geographical constituencies that have defined Kenya's electoral system now. So we're moving slightly away from the typical old single-member constituency process to a mixed system. And one can argue I'm not sure from where I sit that it makes a fundamental difference. I think if you have strong parties, and that's where we want to go. If the party lists are presented before elections, so that as a party is selling itself, it is saying these are the people who, if you elect us, these are the people who will nominate. That also becomes a campaign angle for you.
Yeah.
But so I think, and again, it's probably the only way we're going to be able to resolve the gender question, because you can't force people to elect any gender. So how do you do that? You have to fill up those seats through a proportional system that encourages gender.
One gets a feeling, Kamotho, whenever we have these sorts of processes, this particular one, the committee of experts, the discussions at Bomas of Kenya, that we fall short of making a definite decision on something. For example, here you're talking about proportional representation or even changing and altering our electoral system. Why not go all out and say that this is how we're going to do it? We're going to have a mixed member proportional representation where we vote for political parties. Why are we trying to mix and say there's some people who can go and campaign directly, and then based on the strength of a party, then the party shall come in and nominate? The same thing is happening in terms of the national executive and the structure of the national executive. Schools of thought have been, let's have a presidential system, let's have a parliamentary system. We seem to always falling into this one where we're trying to balance it out. Look at what we have now. We have a president who picks the leader of the majority party or coalition of parties in the National Assembly, who becomes the prime minister, but this prime minister does not have powers to form government. What is this that we have? And why can't we just get to a point where we say, this is the rule we are taking, let's go there?
I think part of it is that we use the Constitution to resolve a lot of political realities. One of the things that Kenyans have always been very clear about is that on that issue of the structure of the executive, that they want to vote in the chief executive. That across the board, most people don't want to hear that the person who exercises ultimate constitutional and executive powers is appointed by a cabal of politicians in the House. For some reason, we still, even as we complain about our election system, we have some amazing faith in it. We still want to somehow vote for a chief executive. So that's number one. Number two is that the reason why we are redesigning this system is not even so much to create a parliamentary system. I think it is just that this was the only route available for us to be able to increase the space at the top. So the focus is not so much a change in the system, but what system guarantees that you have fairly strong individuals at the top who are then representatives of the broad, the broad framework of what Kenya looks like. So, and the only way to do that, because if you just brought them to cabinet, then all there would be is senior cabinet ministers. Right. So what you have done then is taken them to the House so that they have responsibilities of running government business in the House, but also retain them in the executive. So they still remain fairly credible offices. So that is what you then sell to the people, not just a glorified senior cabinet minister. So what we are trying to resolve is a political issue, and we're using a constitutional route. But on the question of mixed member proportional representation, I think we are still, don't forget also that we have historical baggage. We are still very committed to our constituencies. And especially when constituencies now are going to play a critical role in the determination of who is the prime minister at that level. So that means that, people do want to have some role in voting members of parliament. And also don't forget that constituencies are frameworks for resource allocation through the National Constituency Development Fund. People are already married to this system. It's if you remove it completely, remember what I said, that this draft tries very much not to raise issues that are so controversial that they'll have very strong enemies. If you remove members of parliament, you're going to have parliamentarians fighting this draft because they want constituencies. So in a sense, it's a pragmatic way of saying, look, how do we ensure we carry everyone together? It's going to be very difficult, even for those that have wanted to oppose the BBI, to oppose because it has something for everybody. And the something it has for everybody, it's not objectionable. You know, we may have different views, but it's not objectionable. So the mixed member is not objectionable. It may not be ideal, but it's not objectionable. But it doesn't have strong enemies. And I think that the document was trying to ensure, which is a good thing, Eric and team. You see, one of the things, my worry, and let me say what my other fear was. My other fear was that the document is going to be contentious, and then it will be voted. We'll go to a referendum. It's going to be voted. It probably would win, maybe with 55%. But that means we now have a constitution which 45% of the people believe is illegitimate, you know, and that is not good for a constitution. So as much as possible in a constitutional process, you want to keep bringing people closer and closer together. And that means, therefore, that some things you bring in, they're not ideal. But the ideal route may not be palatable at this point. But then you keep moving, you keep changing. So I suspect eventually we'll go the mixed member route when devolution has set in and constituencies no longer matter as much as they do today. But you can't kill them now when people's consciousness is still carried on, is still stuck on constituencies.
So introducing dosage by dosage.
Dosage by dosage, yes.
We're speaking with constitutional lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo, understanding the BBI report, looking at what it presents, looking at various viewpoints that have come since yesterday when it was launched. This is a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation on Spice FM, on KTN Home, understanding the BBI report. Kamotho, the problem statement, as was identified by the president and the opposition leader Raila Odinga when they shook hands, when they launched the BBI process, was trying to cure what has been a political problem in the country over the years. Every time there's an election, there's serious contention. Even after the election, we still continue with the contention. And people feel that there are those that win and they take everything, then there are those that do not win, but they have sufficient support countrywide and they're left out. Does BBI resolve that issue?
It tries to. And by the way, just before I answer that, the issue you resolved about us not being sometimes very clear on the issues and leaving them to conjecture is most interesting in the proposal regarding the governors and their deputies, because the bill says that a governor in making the decision on their deputy may consider gender. It doesn't require them to. It just says they may consider, you know, which is interesting, but I'll just leave that there. But on this issue, I think it does. I think one of the things we fail to understand is that the problem in our election system is not really about that the elections are compromised. It is not. I think, yes, there's no perfect election. But I've been around, I have monitored enough elections around and about to know that our election is actually one of the better ones. And you know that, and I said this before, you know that when you assess our petition, many of them affirm the election, which tells you that the process is generally acceptable. Why is it that it's rejected at the national level? Because we have a dysfunctional system which does not incentivize a losing candidate to support the result. Because the way our elections are done is that for some time we're probably going to have a 50, at most 50-40. But most use time is 55-45, which means that the losing candidate still controls, in terms of support, half the country, you know, which means that that person is a very senior political leader. What happens is that the day after the elections, we'll tell them, thank you very much, it was good knowing you, we'll see you next year. And then we create some member of parliament who we now call the leader of the majority party, who actually has very little power, other than a big office and a couple of cars and security. Meanwhile, the political leader who garnered some 10 million votes has no role politically. Even their supporters do not now know where to go from there. So the reason why we have created the office of the leader of the official opposition and granted it status and said that this person, the person who's going to be the leader of the opposition, is the best loser. You know, the highest loser. That is the person who's be the leader of the opposition. That gives that person, even if they're not going to be president, there's some incentive in them supporting the result, because in any event they're not going to go into political doldrums. So that is part of what it is resolving. the desire to ensure that these people have incentives. Of course, also the increase of the space at the top also is a good thing. But even more importantly, people don't understand that these things also have to do with how strong the devolved system is. For as long as we continue weakening the devolved system and denying it money, then everybody wants to be at the top. Even everybody, the people in Karachuonyo, the people in Madiwa, in my constituency, the people in the Sarakanidi, everybody wants to ensure they have representatives at the top because that is where everything comes from. So when you strengthen and allocate more money to the devolved system, it doesn't matter. It still matters, but it doesn't matter as much. Everything is not gained or lost by whether you win or lose the presidency. So I think those are some of the things that the draft has attempted to do to reduce. But number 3 is also about the commission. Purely from a constitutional legal perspective, having a commission that is representative of political parties is a very dangerous route.
Yeah.
Because then what you're saying is that when I know I have come to represent Party X, let's say Jubilee, then my loyalty is to Jubilee, not to the process. And so in a sense, I'm going to find it very difficult for me to support a result that sends my candidate home.
Mm-hmm.
That is why we had intended to have independent members who are not direct representatives of political parties. But from a political perspective, what it means is that if that institution is able to affirm a result, that result will be accepted because that result now is affirmed by representatives even of the losing candidate. But as to whether that's going to be possible, I think that's going to be a bit difficult. But I think that was the intention by ensuring that IEBC now
becomes an IPPG
of politicians. It's an IPPG model.
Mr. Waiganjo, I love what you're saying, but there are those who have simplified this problem that you elaborated on really very well, that is the electoral process in itself, especially the voting process, is in this country, it's almost flawless. I personally have never witnessed a more peaceful, pleasant activity. When the voting ends, the counting begins and results are relayed, that's where the problem occurs.
Yes.
Now, having pointed that, those very same people say that if that isn't resolved, that point, then even that peaceful process that we have, because our electoral voting processes tend to be very peaceful, there's no question about it. And that's why people who come here as independent observers get confused when they wonder, but we saw the electoral process, it was very good, the voting process was good, what happens thereafter? That thereafter, would you say that the BBI addresses it?
No, well, here's the reality. In terms of the process issues, we have probably gone as far as we can in ensuring that they're credible. If you remember the amendments that were done, the Orengo Kiraito Committee, the reason it was trying to answer the technical questions about how do you ensure that our voting and our reporting system is flawless. And I think they did as much as they could, including that is where they introduced the electronic system by saying that the form, now there are 37, whatever it is transmitted electronically as soon as the results are answered. And as soon as the results are announced, the counting happens. But despite that technical efficiency, it's still there was also lack of political support. I don't believe myself that fundamentally our problem with our election system is a technical process. It is actually a political process. And that political process, you resolve it, one, by what I talked about, incentives, and two, ensuring that the oversight body, whoever is overseeing this political process, is acceptable politically. So that's what I talked about, why politically having the IBC, having representatives of political parties is useful, because now they can ensure that the sort of shenanigans that may happen in compromising the technical system do not happen. And when they then stand up and say, yes, this process represents, these results represent a flawless process, that statement is acceptable. Because it is one thing for the process to be flawless. It's another one for that flawlessness to be acceptable. And don't forget, if there is no incentive to accept, people reject. People reject even when they know they have genuinely lost, because there is no incentive. So that's what I'm saying, that it's a double-edged proposal to resolve. By resolving the political of incentive and ensuring that the people who then say this is a good result are acceptable politically. In terms of the electronic process, I think and that's why elections are expensive. We have one of the most comprehensive, transparent, whatever. It can still be compromised, but generally we have a good system. Let's now ensure that it has political support. That's what's been lacking.
You know, my view is on that political support front, our problem is not necessarily a political support, it's a personality issue. It's a cabal of personalities who are at the helm of our national politics at present who perpetuate this. The same way you've said, when you have election petitions in all the other seats, in the governor's seat, in the senator, in member of parliament, in the MCA, it goes to court. The loser goes home, but the loser accepts the result. The loser accepts the outcome of the petition in the court. Why is it that we have these people at the national level who feel that they need to be placated, who feel that they need to be accommodated, who feel that they need to feel represented? Because that's the same thing that we're saying. Even if we say, okay, let's accept that the runner-up goes into the National Assembly, becomes the leader of opposition. Makes sense. But why then expand into the others? Why do we have to have all the other seats just so that we can feel that, you know, people are represented? Like I was saying earlier when we were looking at it, I was saying this is a pentagon kind of system where people come together in an election and they form this pentagon and they're saying that I will be president, you will be deputy, you will then be prime minister, and you two will be deputy prime ministers, and we'll form government. It's about the personalities at the top.
Eric, and I agree with you, but don't forget that if you're going to stand for president in this country and garner 40% support, you are a particular kind of personality. It's not that as a person there's a defect. It is that the process creates a particular kind of person. You know, for you need to be a chieftain. You need to be a fairly strong individual. You need to be very convinced you're the only one who can lead this country. That's the sort of person who ends up running for the president. So either way, whichever way, even if the current people on the slate are not there, the other ones we will produce will probably be almost similar. But let's not forget the reason why the expansion of the executive is not just about acceptability of the election. It is also to ensure, and I think the president hinted to it during Mashujaa Day, if we retain the system that we have today, the presidential system, which is very thin at the top, you are guaranteeing probably only two communities will ever have the presidency. Or at least there's one or two which will always be in the presidency. Because when you have only two seats at the top, it just means that if you have a guaranteed 25% of the vote, it means that you'll either be or you determine. Because all other communities are at 10%, which means all you need to do is you with 25%, you just need to add one more, and you're already in the 30s. Anybody will have to combine more than two, and yet there are only two seats. How do you combine the two? So there's a very pragmatic approach by saying, look, why don't we say increase that number so that you can actually get a coalition of minorities and still be able to get the presidency.
But Kamotho, would it be a coalition of minorities?
That's the reality. That's a pragmatic reality.
Would it be a coalition of minorities, or would it be that even if we talked about this chieftain at the top, essentially, who is an individual worth his or her salt, by the time they get to that point where the entire country is looking at you as an option to pick to lead, there's something about you. That's already ascertained, right? So if you're looking at having more flesh at the top, is it then really an answer to the problems that have been previously been witnessed? Or is it to make sure that those who went along with you then also have some kind of reward? Because that's the question that's being asked, I mean, against in the general population now, is that is it being created so that individuals who have people around them who have supported them along this time will get a reward for that support? Or is it an answer to the problems that have been previously been witnessed when it comes to putting people in this elected office?
I think the response is at two levels. Don't forget that even as Kenyans oppose these processes and say, let's not have all individuals at the top, Kenyans want the individual at the top. You know, they want the individual at the top. We are still, it's a very sad reality, but we are still voting regionally, ethnically, largely. I think we're moving slowly away from there. I pray that we do. But in the meantime, we're still there. The truth of the matter is that communities will support a ticket which has one of the are more likely, let me not be scientific, are more likely to support a ticket which has a person who they feel is a representation of their community. That is just where we are now. And so what this says is that you can therefore have a coalition of fairly, what would actually be numerically small communities, but combined together, they can be able to produce a strong candidate and be able to actually carry the election, because they require, you are not now tied to only two people. So yes, part of the reason is that is how you bring communities in politics. That's where our politics are. And if you leave the system as it is now, you leave two communities at the top, and that is problematic.
But
also,
Kamotho,
yes, it's a way of system, because what you're going to be able to be saying that in the community X, who do you go for? You go one for a person who probably supports your policies, but also somebody who commands authority within
a particular
the community.
region. Yeah.
but
in a
Kamotho,
particular region.
I think it still brings in the issue of the big five here.
Yes, that's true.
If you look at what has been happening, even in the last 2 or 3 elections, it's still looking at how do you build a coalition? You're building a coalition with people who are bringing in the numbers. If it's the Jubilee One had Ruto, had Ngilu, had Balala. It was assumed that, they would now be representing those other regions. If it is Raila, Kalonzo, Wetangula, looking at the coast, and then you have people like Joho who occupy a senior position in ODM, it's still trying to basically deal with the big tribes, that there will be a Luo, a Kikuyu, a Luya, a Kamba. Those will always occupy the top. Is there a possibility of that coalition forming, the minorities forming, for example, the Turkana and the other smaller tribes coming together to form government?
One hopes we will get there. I think the theory of it looks very attractive and very appealing, and one prays for the time we'll get there. I doubt that we're going to get there in 2022 and 2027. But what this does, it opens that possibility. It opens up that possibility that if you have grown your brand, fairly strongly, that it is possible to still, you're not now tied to then have to pick X because those are the only 2 seats available. But you can actually spread out and look for community leaders, from leaders which may not by themselves have the numbers, but once combined together, remembering that the others will also be dividing their votes, that you can actually, there's a possibility you could get to the top. That is where we want to go. We would not have gone there in the previous system. This opens up a greater, it doesn't guarantee it, but it opens up a greater possibility of a coalition, not necessarily of big communities, But one where, yes, you can still have some communities, but you can actually have someone from a minority supported by 4 persons who are from these. So it's to say that what this does, it opens possibilities. But in any event, the system we had was not a good system. It was not helpful. It did not help the feelings of inclusion because it's not just about, and that's what I keep saying. Kenyans are very good in theory, and I think a lot of these are us elitists who don't think it's a big deal. But out there, you try and tell people that, the people of the Western Province, the former Western Province, are not going to have somebody there on that top 5. And they will riot. Even as they say, we have too many seats at the top, they want few seats as long as those few seats are their person. The same thing people say about constituencies. We have too many constituencies, but don't remove mine. 47 counties are too many, but please don't touch my county. So I think the political realities of our country are where they are, and they are more reflected by the proposals that have been made than where we are at. So that's what I'm saying. It's not perfect, but I think it takes us closer to a route which is more inclusive than where we have come from. Finally, let me keep emphasizing, there's a solution to this country's economic problems is not in a bigger national government. That I have no doubt in my mind. I don't think expanding, because resources being spent in Nairobi and priorities being determined in Nairobi and the procurement happening in Nairobi in big institutions is not helpful. Ultimately, the mix of these is to ensure, even as you have the national acceptability of the national leadership, you are empowering the regions a lot more, and you're taking, because those resources have the ability to change the lives of people. In fact, by the way, talking about why I was pleasantly surprised, I kept asking, okay, I understand this constitution is dealing with the political elite questions about how to share power. What's in it for the citizen? What's in it for the citizen?
Yeah.
And I would say that what's in it for the citizen is a devolution chapter, more resources. Let's assume I've seen the EACC chapter has been strengthened by ensuring that there's a legislative process for better prosecution of corruption. Let's assume that process works. Yeah? Then it means that you will have more resources available at the bottom. In any case, even if the system doesn't work, you're still better off with more resources at the bottom, even if they're getting lost. There's a spread. There's a devolution of resources in whichever way. So from where I see it, the way you resolve Kenya's problems is, one, resolve the national problem, because that guarantees you a safe political environment, but also ensure that you're devolving resources to the bottom. It even reduces the level of corruption as you keep devolving. That's the reality. People are more careful, particularly as Kenyans get more enlightened, and people are more alert than they are at the national level. At the national level, you can get away 60 billion shillings and nobody will ever know. You go to the counties and take 20 million shillings and every villager will be knowing. So I think there's a sense in which, that's what I'm saying, it's an attempt to resolve some of our problems, and it's a pleasant surprise. By the way, for lawyers, they'll be happy to see that Bwana Mashari and Jeru and Martin Deche, who are their representatives, will not be allowed to practice during the time they're members of the JSC. That's been a problem for many lawyers, because you cannot be practicing in court in which you're the one who is the employer and the one,
rules.
So in a sense, that's what I'm saying. There are certain positive things that have resolved the problems that have been there in the Constitution, which are fairly positive.
As you went on to that, just touching on something that also, we're having the discussion about that in terms of independence of commissions. And you've just touched briefly on that now. And if you look at the commissions across board and other agencies now, from the DPP to the DCI to IPOA to the JSC itself, talking about some kind of independence then that is being introduced in this report. However, it would seem that it's independence in word and not not in deed.
That's true.
Whereby the independence means, all right, there's certain things that you can do in terms of decisions. However, you're not really standing alone because you don't have the power of the purse. So are we really looking at independence of these commissions, independence of these bodies, if they don't have authority when it comes to spending of funds?
It's a very problematic area, and that's because there are two ways in which commissions have stopped being independent. One is the nature of personnel we are appointed to those commissions. The minute it become the initial commissions that are appointed, the immediate the Grand Coalition team were fairly strong institutions. But thereafter, I think government said never again, and so, increasingly you've had, and that's a reality, you've had weaker and weaker institutions. So there's a problem there, and I'm not sure there's a solution to that, because you still have to subject this to a parliamentary process. And so as long as parliament plays at the behest of the executive, that's probably going to be a problem. But the second level, which I had hoped this would resolve, was the question of money. The one way to punish commissions is by denying them money. I can tell you, Eric, in the time that I was at CIC, I attended at least 10, and I'm being, generous, meetings with parliamentarians when they told us they will not allocate us money, because of a stand you have taken. They have denied money to SRC because of playing around with their salary.
EACC.
So that's a problem, and I'd have hoped that there's something that would have been done so that process, part of it is taken out of parliament, so that you guarantee a particular budgetary allocation for these institutions to at least enable them to function. You see, because what is protected now is their salary. So they give you the salary, but they don't give you money for operations. So one would have hoped, like the way they said 5% for what, whether you'd have said a certain amount so that you ensure that these institutions are able to carry out their role.
Sure.
But of course, that also comes along with whether they themselves are operating independently, or whether they've become, lackeys of the executive. The JSC, by the way, talking about pleasant surprise, I was worried that the JSC was going to be weakened so that it becomes purely like other commissions where members are appointed purely from parliament, because there are proposals like that. So I was very surprised that it wasn't touched. It still remained with the representatives of the Court of Appeal, High Court, lawyers, and the presidency and all that, which is a good thing, because you do want that, despite its dysfunction, you still want an institution institution that is also, especially for the judiciary, an institution that does not appear to be an extension or at least controlled by the executive. So for me, that was a pleasant surprise, and I think it's a good thing.
Finally,
even as we continue to clean it.
Finally, for now, Kamotho, let's talk about some of the comments that we've seen emerging from these proposals. It appears to have created now an imperial presidency, or basically just given the president much more power, much more leeway, even in the appointment and the dismissal of a prime minister. You have a person who has gone hand in hand with a presidential candidate and campaigned for votes, and they become a vice president, but they're not even recognized. Now we have more recognition of a post of a prime minister than of a vice president. Then the president also has powers to appoint principal secretaries without vetting by the National Assembly. The president can now even appoint an ombudsman in the judiciary. This president is getting more and more powers.
That's true. That's one of the challenges of this amendment, is that it actually has strengthened the presidency. It has strengthened the presidency. But let me say this, and this is not necessarily a very palatable position. Kenyans, we demand a lot on the president. I think we're so used to a big man. We've never had a big woman. That we when something doesn't work, we demand it of the president. But then there are certain strictures we put on. So, for example, we require the presidency to deliver on their agenda. But then you tell them that the team that they will appoint is not their team. It has to be a team that is acceptable to parliament.
Yep.
Now that parliament, you as the president may not have the majority. Because it doesn't follow that because you're the president, you'll always have the majority members of parliament. So your opponents can actually determine the character of your executive. So in a sense, it's probably a good thing if you hold you hold him accountable. My question is, do we have strong oversight power? Because there are two institutions that oversight to the executive. It is parliament and the judiciary. Are we ensuring that those institutions are strong enough so that when we have given the president this power, he can deliver and he does not use excuses? He doesn't tell us he can't because, but he's able to deliver. Does Parliament one have the legal structures to hold the presidency accountable? And does it have the character? Does it have the capacity? Does it have the tenacity to hold the president accountable? I think that is a problem that we'll have to resolve, because Parliament has what it takes in law to be a strong institution.
Yep.
It doesn't depend on the executive anymore.
Yep.
Why does it not exercise that power? That is something that I think, what are the quality of people that we elect into Parliament, so that even when they have power, they don't exercise it. So I don't think the solution is to weaken the presidency in certain key areas, particularly when it comes to appointment of the people who carry out the agenda. But, and then finally, I am not sure myself that in real terms that vetting has made a difference in terms of quality.
Yeah.
What it has made a difference in is in terms of political negotiation, as opposed to quality of leadership. So you have a president who knows that 1, 2, 3 people could do a good job in terms of enabling me to carry out my agenda. But I have to sail them through this parliament, and so I have to compromise. So I'm saying that it's probably, in any case, let's try it. This one has not necessarily been very useful. Let's try it and see. Maybe in 10 years we'll be back saying we must have an approval process. And because it is Parliament that will make the amendment, I'm sure it will be possible to do that. But let's try this system and see.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You say so. Others may disagree. Thank you very much, constitutional lawyer Kamotho Waiganjo. Thank you for speaking to us, and thank you for shedding light on your perspectives on the BBI report. We'll be asking you to speak to us again as this debate gathers steam.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Kamotho.